This is David Thornburgh, President and CEO of the Committee of 70, talking to you and in our studio C70 here on our global headquarters down on South Broad Street. We have an election coming up November 5th. We're electing Mayor of Philadelphia, City Council, both at-large and district council people. We're electing local judges and also state judges. So take a couple of minutes between now and November 5th and try to remove yourself from the distractions of Washington and remind yourself, and we'll help remind you why local elections are so important and why you need to come out to vote. To help inform the conversation, we've invited all the council members, both at large and district, who are running this fall to come and spend a few minutes with us to make their case as to why they want to be elected or reelected. And as part of that, I'm glad to welcome Councilman Curtis Jones to join us. So, Councilman.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. We were just comparing notes. Councilman and I go back a few years, and we won't talk about how many years.
Not at all.
It's all useful experience.
Yes.
Okay. So just to get things started, I'm going to ask the councilman every pollster's favorite question, which is, in your view, is the city, and you can talk about the city and your district, on the right track, on the right, or on the wrong track? And depending on where you come out, what's going well, what's not going so well?
So overall, I would say the city of Philadelphia is on the right track. Slow, incremental, but on the right track. You have to put in context that I came under the Nutter administration, and we were this close to bankruptcy. We were, like most of the nation, the housing market had taken a tank.
This is the recession post 2008.
Correct.
Yep.
And so we were literally in rooms trying to decide how we were going to fare. So if you compare now to then, we have a surplus now, 300 million plus. It's almost as challenging when you have deficits, because you make tougher choices when you have a deficit. You then have to declare what is important to you when you have surpluses, and you vote with the appropriations. Mm-hmm. And so we're in the right direction. I think in my district in particular, because that's the United States of the 4th district, everywhere else is France. We support France, but I fight for my district. We have a tale of 2 districts. Roxborough, Manayunk, East Falls, Paradise, Overbrook Farms, Parkside, Carroll Park, and Haddington represents about 150,000 people. Mm-hmm. If you asked people on different polar opposite ends, it's not one size fits all. In some parts of my district, we are craving development, want more housing and commercial. In other parts of my district, we're doing things like moratoriums on demolition and historic certifications on Ridge Avenue, because to some degree we've been overdeveloped. Mm-hmm. And there are unintended consequences that come with that. Yeah. So managed growth, smart growth in one area, and encouraging more growth in others.
Yeah, I was looking at your district map before I sat down with you, and you've got, I know that map was drawn almost 10 years ago now. Mm-hmm. It is an interesting district. You probably have the greenest council district, I would think, among the council districts, because of the proximity to the park and
66% of the parkland is in the 4th district. So yeah. If you include like the smaller pocket parks, but also Belmont Plateau, all the way up to Valley Green, we have a nice piece of the park.
But as you were saying, you've also got pockets of entrenched poverty mm-hmm. in your district, so you've got to be a man for all seasons, I guess.
So some people would say that you have to be very diverse. I have $1 million homes, and then I have homes that have a negative net worth, meaning that it would cost more to tear it down than it is actually worth. If you look at parts of my district, you have people who the biggest issue is how to deal with young folks in town and gown issues
Mm-hmm.
that party a little hard, like
Mm-hmm.
when we were young.
Mm-hmm.
But in other parts of my district, every 28 days, someone will be shot,
Yeah.
sometimes fatally. One of the most difficult parts of my job is going to these memorials where you have to give condolences to a parent who lost a child and had to bury their own child.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to balance those two kinds of realities.
Yeah. So you are hoping to win your fourth term in office, so 12 years already under your belt. If you look back at the trajectory of the city and the district that you represented, what are you most proud of? What are you most what's still on the to-do list that maybe you take a shot at in your next term if you're reelected?
So on Market Street, we have a $50 million development, one of the largest RAPP grants that was awarded in 2017.
This is the state program for capital redevelopment.
Correct.
Yeah.
With a partnership with Senator Hughes, Representative Morgan Cephas, and working with the city of Philadelphia, we were able to attract that type of investment there. It's going to retain 300 jobs and create another 100. That's a anti-poverty program if I ever saw one.
Mm-hmm.
In other parts of my district, that managed growth I talked about, and I'm proud of, is working with the federal, state, and local government to manage traffic. The 1 hour traffic rush hour has translated into 2-3 hours in certain parts of my district because of overdevelopment and the lack of planning for parking. So the nurse that gets off at the second shift, David, has to walk 3 blocks to get to her home. And so we have to plan better for that. And we're working with the federal government to talk about different access and egresses across that river, working with our partners in the county. We're working with the Philadelphia Parking Authority to take lots that they own and double, triple decker them.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to start requiring developers to include in their package a parking plan that includes things like Uber and Lyft, like in remote parking areas. And we're working with the Chamber of Commerce to put together that plan.
Yeah. I was actually in Manioc a few weeks ago. I actually took the train out there, and like a lot of stops on the regional rail or the subway system, there's not a lot of parking around those places, which some folks have said, over the years really limits. It puts constraints. It also puts constraints on the community and limits the attractiveness of that, the transit stop. But on the other hand, you do 2-3 decks of parking at around rush hour, morning and evening, neighbors are not particularly happy to have all the cars circulating around. So
there is a neighborly way that we have to plan. And it should include folks who are car bound, but it also should include the strap hangers that use that means of transportation. And what I've noticed that a lot of younger constituents
I'm glad you're pointing at me when you say that.
I mean you. Constituents aren't opposed to catching the train, aren't opposed to safe and reliable buses and mass transportation options. And so we're trying to work with our counterparts at the state and federal level to come up with comprehensive plans to address those kinds of future needs. So in my district, land is at a premium, like most places. But if we are to develop them, we better have a corresponding plan for parking and traffic.
Yeah. Since we're talking about development, and I know you have a long background in community development, we and others have sometimes been quite concerned about what we all call councilmanic prerogative, which some folks say gives district council people almost absolute rights in determining what happens or doesn't happen in terms of development in their districts. Some folks, including us, have criticized that process for being less than transparent. Other folks have noted that, we pushed hard to create a land bank. I guess can't remember exactly how long it's been.
It's been about 4 years
Yeah.
now. Mhm.
And let's just say neither the deposits nor the withdrawals have been sufficient
At all.
in the land bank.
Mhm.
So just like to hear your thoughts about, as a district council person, on how you view councilmanic prerogative, what works, what doesn't work, what ought to change, what you hear from your constituents.
So well, I hear a
A
lot
lot.
from my constituents about prerogative, but I try to explain that prerogative is neutral. It is like a hammer. In some people's hands, it is a tool to build a good future for communities. In other people's hands, it's a tool to bludgeon people over the head, and they misuse that tool. I remember when I first ran in '07, the big thing was to take away some of that discretion of a council person and by right. So predictability. I remember the
Mhm.
discussions and how they wanted to move it more towards the civics, keep those politicians out of it.
Mhm.
Total reverse now. I hear from those same civics talking about, can't you stop those developers? Can't you use your power for good, right? To make sure that they comply with design that is uh, uh, compatible with the area that they come from. So in one part of my district, there was a beautiful mansion, David, at the top of the ridge, and it is now a McDonald's because by right, they had the right to tear that down,
Mhm.
bought the property, and now. So that prompted us to do historic designations on over 180 properties to preserve them so that we can have some discussion. So the pendulum of opinion swings back and forth. The person that is less than transparent should be checked. People who go and make sure that their civics are aware
Mhm.
of what is going on and what is being planned should be encouraged to do that.
Mhm.
And so I'm kind of for the prerogative.
Yeah. And how do you view let's just call it the disappointing performance of the land bank? And I know there's a bill out there that will proposes to change part of that process, but uh, how do you look at the future of the land bank, and what was the fight, was the struggle to create it worth it?
So, so my
And if it is, then what do we got to do to
so
fix
my
it?
good friend and colleague and sister Maria Sanchez fought for that land bank.
Mhm.
In her mind, in designing it, it was to be a transparent way to dispose of city acquired properties and through the alphabets, redevelopment authority, PHDC, public property, and to get that in a pool and for the highest and best use of that land and repurposing of it. Um, Somehow in that struggle, before that was the Vacant Property Review Committee,
Mhm.
which had a layer of bureaucracy. You put that right on top of it. And so you didn't create efficiency, you created another layer.
Mhm.
And so what I've learned, and hashtag experience does matter, um, is that sometimes you can negotiate yourself out of the effectiveness of a bill. And compromise is important to pass a bill, but if you compromise so much that what was the point?
Mhm.
And so, in retrospect, hindsight is always 2020. Maybe we, people who wanted to reform that, should have fought a little harder to maintain the tenets
Mhm.
of why you wanted
Mhm.
the land bank.
Let me ask you about another issue that has come into our field of view, which is term limits. Always in cities that don't have term limits, and a lot of them do,
Mhm.
legislatures that don't have term limits, there's always a conversation about, pluses and minuses of term limits. Here you are running for your fourth term. By the way, in the version of term limits that we are supporting, or conceptually, I think we've said, well, you get 3 terms to do something, so you'd be out of a job at this point. But
Mhm.
so what's the best argument? Presume that you're not terribly, you're cool to the idea of term limits, but I don't want to presume. Maybe you say 4 terms is just fine.
So
Where are you on that?
I'm
What
of the
you-
opinion that, and Councilman Greenlee said it best, that every 4 years there's a term limit.
Yeah.
You have to run. And you go before your employers, who are the taxpayers, who are the boss, and say, how did I do? And did I do enough to earn your respect and your vote? Experience does matter. It takes, Michael Nutter said it to me when I was a freshman, and I was wide-eyed and
Mhm.
very optimistic. And he said, "You won't know what you're doing until your third term,
Mhm.
because the process slows down for you. That budget process from January to June is arduous. You have to pay attention. But I also know that right around 2 weeks before we pass it, that's when we begin the negotiations in earnest. You have to decide what you're willing to pay for, what you care about. A lot of people don't know that it costs about $75,000 to do 4 lights of traffic lights, and they're not as safe as stop signs. National statistic.
I actually did know that. And
You knew that?
Oh, yeah, because a stop sign makes you stop or pause
Mhm.
even. If you get a yellow light,
You-
most people, unfortunately,
Mhm.
put the hammer down.
Mhm.
Right?
So those things you learn. It's 3,000 miles. What winds up in your head? 3,000 miles of sewer under our feet. For some people, that's a problem. It's 100 years old. They break. Water main break here, there. But it's also an opportunity. Same word in China for problem is opportunity.
Mhm.
And the reason that is because we could spend the next 25 years fixing those pipes that leak at a rate of 23% of our fresh water goes right into the ground because of those leaks. So if you know those kinds of things, during the budget process, you compose that. I remember in one budget session, I asked, how many departments hire right out of our high schools, our trade schools? And people scratched their head and said, well, no, we have a process by which and I said, well, we have Randolph Skills Center that has a great automotive program. Why don't you take a look at their kids? Today, 1/3 of the automotive repair unit comes from trade schools, and particularly Randolph.
Mm.
So if you are around long enough and you sit in enough rooms, you pick that up and you're able to better serve the public.
Yeah.
So my mind is full of solutions. I used to be a revolutionary. Now at our age, I'm a solutionary.
You're a
I'm not-
solutionary.
I'm a solutionary. I'm not a revolutionary.
Okay. Well, that conversation about term limits is probably one that lends itself to a few beers because,
Okay.
of course, the flip side is there are people, we won't name names, at every level of government, every kind of job that just hang on too long and lose the fire in the belly, forget about the solutions and just get used to the trappings of office or what have you. And so, term limits, whatever you trying to strike the right balance so that you get the best of experience, but you limit the downside of maybe it's a tough job.
So
It's a tough job.
you're absolutely
So-
right. I sit in rooms where we have to make $1 out of 50 cents. I want to sit next to people who are bringing something to that discussion.
Mhm.
I don't want to sit next to people who are on some type
Cruise
of
control.
right. No, I need people who are
Yeah.
knee deep in it.
Okay. A quick question, but it sounds like an easy one to answer, but probably isn't. People come to you with ideas, proposals, bills, drafts, whatever, all the time. Along the way, have you come to a conclusion about proposals that you will never support? And on the flip side, if somebody comes to you with something, I'm always in on that particular kind of.
So I have a tendency to anything dealing with our youth.
Mhm.
And when I say our youth, I mean not just our brightest and our best, but our troubled youth. I'm always willing I've been a reliable vote for public education,
Mhm.
and I will always be there. One of the things why I like the mayor, Jim Kennedy used to sit that far in front of me, so I could tell you stories about things he's muttered under his breath.
He's a mutterer.
He's a mutterer. But one of the things he was consistent about was putting his vote where his mouth was when it came to supporting public education. So I want to always be that person. Now I want to be accountable on how that money is spent and what we're getting for our dollar, but I will always be that. What I probably would never want to deal with is outsourcing. I over the long term, um, a lot of our public servants that have come um, have done a better job of some of the things the private sector, no disrespect, always says they can do it better. Uh, Eventually, after they get their foot in the door, that price goes up, that relying on them goes up. A lot. I can go to our computer systems. We spent about $83 million, David, on all of the information system. They came to council with a document, razor thin, without documentation. And we were so stuck to dealing with the vendors that we were used to that we don't, we probably should have kept a lot of those services and responsibilities in-house.
Okay.
So,
We just have a couple more minutes left, and now's your case. You can look right at the camera, or you can look at me, wherever you want. Make your case as to why you ought to be reelected to a fourth term.
Thank you. All my life, this is what I wanted to be. I'm a West Philly boy, born and raised, unlike Will Smith, Overbrook High. I used to come down to a place called Miller's Inn and deliver lunches to people like Cecil B. Moore. And I decided then that that is a place where you can be at the epicenter of public policy. In so doing, that same building where I worked, I wound up being a part of the negotiations for the contract to build the Criminal Justice Center. And now, as an elected official, I'm the chair of Criminal Justice Reform. I've closed jails and opened $50 million opportunities in neighborhoods that have been underserved. I intend to continue that. There are going to be at least 3 to 5 new members in city council. I am the third most tenured council person now. Me and Maria are tied for that. And when we're making these critical decisions about your tax dollars, your city and community's future, you want an adult at the table. You want somebody that makes grown-up decisions. One thing I will say about Michael Nutter, in our worst times, he was the adult at the table. And he said, no, we're going to cut spending. We're going to be responsible. We're not going to cut services. We'll go back and forth about what recreation center, and we'll keep our libraries open, but we won't make adult decisions. Whether you support the far left or the far right, I like that middle and that middle responsibility to make sure your neighborhoods are well serviced and safe. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councilman.
David,
all right.
Thanks,
Pleasure.
Man. All right.
Once again, Election Day, November 5th, polls open at 7, close at 8. Between now and then, take a couple of minutes to talk to your neighbors, talk to your people that you work with about what's going on, what's coming up. If you need some more help, you can turn to our website, which is 70.org, the words 70.org. And you can also download the We Vote app that we developed about a year ago that gives you the chance in the palm of your hand to learn about candidates and issues and the mechanics of voting in elections and so forth. As I said, in the meanwhile, in our view, Election Day ought to be a celebration of community. So take the chance to talk to your friends, your neighbors, encourage your kids. If you have little ones, bring them out to the polls. It's one of the best ways to get young people aware of their rights and responsibilities as citizens. So You should have some work to do between now and November 5th, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the polls. Thanks so much for joining us.